It is my pleasure to welcome you again on behalf of the FeBo team to our 13th FeBinar, the talks organized as part of our ERC project. FeBo is funded by the European Research Council and is hosted by the University of Trento, the Department of Humanities. Our aim is to explore border management cultures bottom-up, as well as strategies applied by Greek federal states in order to help secure stability and inner cohesion by managing the different challenges posed by the league's internal and external borders in a flexible way. In order to shed new light on border management policies and cultures, so both bottom-up as well as top-down, we are especially interested in the role played by techniques of balance of power, as well as networks of informal political actors who cross borders on a regular basis, so border commuters, Grenzgänger, and invigorated border spaces together with the things they carried, so both people and objects. You can find everything on our FeBo website and on the University of Trento's YouTube channel, where also the recordings of the past FeBinar, you can find also the recordings of the past FeBinars. By now, our audience of affectionate online specialists knows what FeBinars are and how we understand them, but I will repeat it for new entries. They are not conferences nor lectures. I like to think of them as workshops, as a think tank. We have built a kind of virtual lab in the framework of which we work on federalism, borders, border management, and we periodically invite an external expert to our lab to exchange ideas with us and to present us with cases by offering his or her expertise. Since intra-federal and extra-federal, so internal and external borders, must necessarily be approached from various research and different research perspectives and with different questions, FeBo organizes two distinct series of lectures, each with another focus, one on internal borders, the management of internal borders by federal states, the other one on external borders, crossing federal borders, ancient and modern. And both series have been initiated by the inaugural lecture delivered by Hans Beck on March 7th of the past year, which focused on a case study involving both intra-federal and external borders, the Masi Plain. This FeBinar is the sixth one of the FeBinar series Crossing Federal Borders, Ancient and Modern, so focusing more on external border areas of ancient Greek federal states, and it will address interactions between Aitolians and annexed territories within the Federation. Let me also remind you that these FeBinars form part of a teaching project, Conflict Management in Ancient Federal Greece, structured on two distinct levels, PhD students and MA students, respectively, with didactic activities envisaged for PhD students and an intensive training program conducted by Claudio Biagetti, Sebastian Scharf, and Roy van Wyk. And also teaching activities aimed at MA students held with the support of history tutors, Rebecca Massinelli and Chiara Comini, who have trained with our postdoc collaborators. So now I leave the floor to Claudia for the presentation of our guest and of her talk.
So it is a special pleasure for me to introduce Chiara Lasagni of the University of Turin, a friend, a colleague, and above all, a renowned expert on the institutional and legal aspects of the ancient Greek federal states. Chiara studied at the University of Turin under the supervision of Federica Culasso. She obtained a PhD in classics from the University of Trieste in 2007. Her dissertation on the polis and ethne of the northwestern Greece was supervised by Michele Faraguna and published in 2019 under the title Le realtà locali nel mondo greco, ricerche su Polis ed Etne della Grecia occidentale. Since 2021, she has held the position of assistant professor at the University of Turin, where she is lecturer in Greek epigraphy and history. Her research interests focus on ancient federalism, localism, and Attic epigraphy, among others. She's also an expert in digital humanities, and some of her recent activities are dedicated to the application of IT resources to the study of ancient history. She's a member of the editorial board of the journals Historica, Studi di Storia Greca e Romana, and the Stoare, Review for Digital Classics. She's the author of 2 books, Le realtà locali nel mondo greco, Alessandria 2019, and Il concetto di realtà locale nel mondo greco, uno studio introduttivo sul confronto fra polis e stati federali, Rome 2011, and several papers. Among the latter, 4 publications are of particular relevance for the FeBo project. I Bularkoi in Aitolia, in Historica 2 2012, la definizione di Stato federale nel mondo greco in Dike 1213 2009-2010, Politeia in Greek Federal States, in the miscellany Citizen and Citizenship in the Ancient World, a supplement of Memosine, edited by Lucia Cecchette and Anna Busetto in 2017. And finally, Tribal Polis in northwestern Greece, in the book La question de l'espace au IVe siècle avant Jésus-Christ dans le monde grec et étrusco-italique, edited by Sophie Montelle and Tom Pollini in 2018. I will refrain from speaking any further now, but not without mentioning our next speaker, who will be Liv Donnellan of the University of Melbourne on May 27, so just 5 days away, with a lecture entitled Urbanism and Religious Architecture in Boeotia, Archaeological Reflection on Networks, Communities and Interactions. So after Northwestern Greece and Aitolia, with Chiara, we will switch to Central Greece and Boeotia with Liv. But now I will really stop and give the floor to Chiara for a presentation. Please, Chiara.
Okay. Thank you. Many thanks to Elena Franchi and Claudio Biagetti for this kind invitation. Many thanks for all the colleagues now Zooming, and all the students and colleagues that are present now. I want to just apologize because it's not normal for me to speak fluently in English for 1 hour, in particular if I know that I'm being recorded. So I read from my from my notes, but it's good for you. So we can start sharing the video. Grazie. Okay. Thank you. In the studies about the structure and institutional development of the Aitolian federal states, the analysis of the ancestral organization of the ethnos within its original areas is not a prevalent aspect despite its great importance. Instead, what is predominant is the examination of territorial expansion of the Aitolians beyond their borders, that is, beyond the mountainous inland regions of the Euritanes, Apodotes, and Ophiones throughout the late classical and Hellenistic eras. This expansion began in the late 5th century as a quest for access to the sea, which culminated in the following century with the acquisition of a significant portion of the coastal region bordering the Gulf of Corinth, from eastern Acarnania to western Locris. Aetolia's territory reached its zenith in the 3rd century until the Social War, extending its boundaries in all directions, from Ambracia to Dolopia, from Achaia, Phthiotis to eastern Locris, among others. The study of the stages of Aitolia's territorial expansion, their chronology and mechanisms represents a vast and rich field of research in Aitolian studies, still full of controversial points. This panorama of research has given rise to various perceptions and the interpretation of the Aitolians' attitudes and purposes in this regard. On one hand, to some extent aligning with Polybius' narrative, there is an emphasis on the aggressive and predatory behavior of the Aitolians, always keen to seize every opportunity to push their imperialist ambitions in the Greek world and to expand their territorial dominion in central Greece. On the other hand, nonetheless, scholarship also emphasized how the Aitolians demonstrated political intelligence and capabilities in institutional planning, progressively shaping their federal institutions as an adaptive response to the diverse regional contexts they not only subjugated, but actually integrated into the Aitolian state through the means of citizenship law and diplomacy. These two perspectives exist in the studies just because they are both equally correspondent to the truth. And this makes the research on the history and institution of the Aitolian koinon so stimulating. As far as the organization of the Aitolian state is concerned, we do not have a general description that covers at least a single phase of its institutional history, such as the detailed account of the Boeotian koinon structure by the anonymous historian of the Hellenica Oxyrhynchia. Nor do we have synthetic references to its general configuration, such as those referring to the Thessalian tetras as these two fragments from Aristotle's constitution of the Thessalians. Additionally, we also lack epigraphic sources that can provide sufficiently reliable information on this aspect, such as public documents that include the rotating committees of federal officials, from which we could infer at least the existence of criteria for the representation of local members in the koinon, such in the case of the boards of the Damiurgoi, Sinarchontes, and Hieronymous in the Molossian koinon. These preliminary considerations are useful for addressing the issue I wish to present today, specifically concerning the tele, that is, territorial districts of the Aitolian koinon, for which, as we will see, we possess only four, let's say, quite an informative attestation in Aetolian inscriptions, two preserved and other two mostly totally supplied in Lacuna. It's evident that the composition of the Aitolian federal states evolved over time, especially given the significant territorial expansion we mentioned earlier. Regarding the problem of the Aitolian districts, this evolution and territorial growth prompts us to question whether a consistent, modular, scalable, and unified organizational model was applied to new territorial acquisition as well as to the Aitolian core, or differently, if different institutional solutions were implemented based on regional peculiarities and the varying strategic importance and resilience of acquired communities. In other words, we can question whether the expansion of the Aitolian state results in a sort of center-periphery institutional configuration, with the annexed territories holding different statuses from Aitolia proper, or rather, the entire territory of the koinon, the original one and the annexed one, was homogeneously integrated into a uniformly conceived structure. If we address the subject from the point of view of federal citizenship rights, in other words, the Aitolian Sympoliteia, we tend to say yes to the latter view. But if we look at the political making, we might answer yes and yes and no to both. For instance, we can assume that all the Acarnanian polis had their representatives in the Aetolian Synedrion, so they shared in the political decision-making on equal terms as the Aetolians. However, they were also the most resilient of the Aetolian, one of the most resilient of the Aetolian Sympoliteuontes. And it's no coincidence that we find Acarnanians in the top positions of the federation only at a later stage. Addressing this question in relation to the issue of territorial districts is challenging, given the poor available sources, and thus providing a definitive answer is very difficult. Indeed, the aim of my presentation is not to give you my final word on the matter, just because I have no final word, but to add more elements to the discussion that can help us get closer to understanding these political realities without preconceived notions and by empirically analyzing everything we can derive from our sources. The organizational machinery of the Aetolian states, and particularly that of its military forces, might have necessitated and benefited from intermediary structures between the polis and the koinon, as seen in other Greek federal unions. Therefore, from a standpoint of common sense, the existence of a unified system of districts throughout Aetolia seems entirely plausible. However, neither common sense nor plausibility should be accepted as criteria in the toolkit of an historian. Therefore, this specific question remains and should remain open, at least for now. We must recall the fact that the epigraphic testimonies on the tele above mentioned don't help us to resolve the issue. It's not that there are so few, but that they exclusively refer to only two territories acquired by the Aetolians, namely the Locricon Telos, centered on the western Locris, and the Straticon Telos, pertaining to the region around the Stratos, which was the part of Acarnania assigned to Aetolia in the partition with Alexander of Epirus in the mid-3rd century. In consequence, over time, scholars have largely adopted one of two opposing positions, namely, seeing this tele as a part of an overall district structure of the Aetolian Federation, or, on the contrary, viewing them as organizational configurations created for the sole management of annexed territories, which actually, by Occam's razor, seems the more natural interpretation suggested by our sources, by the sources available. The two interpretations I have described here represent the principal opposing views that have emerged from an evaluation of the epigraphic evidence on the Aetolian tele. However, there are a number of nuances between the two that further diversify them. In an article published in the late 19th century, Wilhelm Dittenberger argued for the existence of an overall system of districts within the Aetolian Federation to be compared with the Syntelliae of the Achaean League. At that time, the only epigraphic evidence available was related to the Locricon Telos and dated to 189-88. This led Dittenberger to consider this evidence within the narrow context of those dramatic years, just at the end of the Aetolian War with Rome and the reduction of the Aetolian controlled territory. According to his view, these districts were created purely for administrative purposes and did not coincide with ethnic territories. Based on the epigraphic evidence known at the time, Dittenberger indeed proposed the existence of a district structure
one of which, named Locricon, encompassed a territory larger than Western Locri, including also the areas of Eastern Locris and Doris. In light of subsequent epigraphic findings, we now know that Tintenberger's reconstructions doesn't hold up, either chronologically or in terms of territorial layout. Moreover, we are today aware that the Aitolian tele cannot be regarded as purely administrative entities, but more likely as structures within which local collective political identities, not necessarily defined strictly by the original ethnos, but with a political identity, were preserved, despite their merging into the Aitolian Federation, a view that the very recent analysis by Peter Funke has further reinforced. What we can retain from Dittenberger's view, however, is his evaluation of the inscriptions relating to the Locricon telos in light of the specific historical context in which they arose. Indeed, it is always worthwhile to study epigraphic sources providing information on political institutions by firmly anchoring them within the historical and sometimes also microhistorical context in which they were produced. In fact, this serves us as a counterbalance every time we piece together evidence scattered over long periods of time to outline the unitary constitutional structure of an ancient polity. And this is particularly true in the case of the Aitolian Federation, which seems to have always been open to updating its organization as internal and external conditions changed. A perspective that combined chronologically distant evidence to outline a unified interpretation of state organization is Marta Sordi's seminal article published in 1953 on the origins of the Aitolian koinon. In this study, the author's idea that the Locricon and Straticon tele were part of a global district system was based on her concept of a perfect continuity without, let's say, evolutionary gaps between the earlier tribal union of the Euritanes, Apodotes, and Ophiones and the Aitolian Federation of the Hellenistic period. She states, I'm quoting a translation, unfortunately, we do not have knowledge of other tele. However, if, as seems reasonable, the same distributive criterion was followed in the rest of Aitolia, it does not appear risky to affirm that the ancient cantons and the primitive tribal organization survived within the ethnic and territorial tele of the Hellenistic age and in their important political and representative functions. If our sources suggest that the Aitolian tele could be context for decentralized political practices and identities, they actually tell us nothing about the role of the Aitolian districts as interfaces for political representation. Sordi's reconstruction has been more influenced by comparisons with other federations and the role of territorial districts as representative interfaces in those cases than by what the ancient evidence on Aitolia actually shows. I label this rationalizing and unifying approach to ancient federalism as the Boeotian bias. But in cases when even methods of institutional engineering similar to those applied by Clisthenes in his reforms are used as interpretative case for assessing the political functioning of federal states, I even call it the Clisthenic bias, an approach that has largely been abandoned in recent scholarship in favor of more emic and multidimensional ones. A kind of Clisthenic bias, I believe, lays behind Thomas Korsten's interpretation of Aitolian districts in his book, Von Stamm zum Bund. Distancing himself from Marta Sordi's idea of the continuity of the Aitolian koinon, and of districts into which the old ethne were absorbed, Corsten identifies the introduction of a rational district system as the evolutionary gap from Stamm to Bund for the Aitolians. The terminus ante quem of this evolution would be represented by the Treaty of Isopoliteia Military Alliance signed with Acarnania in the mid of the 3rd century BCE, which includes the mention of 7 Aetolian commanders of elite troops and 7 Aetolian treasurers, each accompanied by an ethnic adjective. I will come again, of course, on this document. Basing on their origins and cross-referencing with data on the bularchoi of the Locricon and on the Locricon telos, in particular the bularchos from the Aetolian city of Ragrignon in 2 manumissions from the Locrian Naupatos, he identifies 7 administrative districts. Although these districts had names referring to previous regional or ethnic identities, Locricon, Straticon, according to Corsten, they did not actually correspond to these entities, but were, let's say, artificially designed to ensure proportionality between the population in the member communities and political representation. The name of the telos in the 2 inscriptions from Naupatos that actually is lost in Lacuna would not be Locricon, but rather another one, another unknown district that partly included Aetolian territories and partly annexed territories. Indeed, in addition to ensuring proportional representation among the member communities with their varying demographic weights within the koinon, the districts would have broken the previous ties, homogenizing Aetolian and annexed communities within the federal koinon. This all-encompassing interpretative construction is not only based on very slight evidence, which in itself would be just a minor issue, but it appears to have been significantly influenced by a Clisthenic bias regarding the role and conception of districts. This overview of some position in the bibliography was meant to give an idea of some of the issues at stake before reconsidering the available sources, starting with the data from the Aetolian Acarnanian Treaty that has received so much attention in Corsten's analysis and to which I would like to return. However, a preliminary caveat seems necessary, for which I again refer to the observations of Peter Funke. Unlike what we have seen above, the issue of the general existence of districts in the koinon and the issue of the tele mentioned in the epigraphic sources should be considered separately. In fact, if we consider the tele as organizational structures conceived solely in relation to the non-Aetolian territories annexed by the Aetolians, and this is the view that is most widely accepted and one that personally convinced me, this does not automatically exclude the existence of other types of administrative divisions throughout the entire territory. In favor of this last possibility, however, we do not possess any evidence to date, and the only indications we have about the relations between local components and the koinon point to representation criteria defined solely on the base of membership in the polis federated into the Aetolian Sympoliteia. As I mentioned earlier, evidence supporting a general division by districts can be found can be found in the treaty between Aetolia and Acarnania. This treaty, signed at a debated date, was inscribed on a hollow bronze column found in the sanctuary of Apollo at Thermos, where one of the 4 copies of the treaty was displayed. On the left frame of the slide, I have provided a content outline. The text is composed of initial part concluding with a list of the officials who signed the agreement on behalf of the Aitolians and the Acarnanians, respectively. The Acarnanians, listed second, presented 7 strategoi, one command of cavalry, 1 secretary, and 1 treasurer. The Aitolians, on the other hand, had 1 strategos, 1 hipparch, and 1 grammateus, along with 7 epilectarchoi and 7 tamiae. A different leadership structure between the 2 parties is reflected in the following section, in this section, which contains the terms of a military alliance detailing the forces and expenses each party commits to provide in case of a request for military assistance. The decision to send troops was the responsibility of the Committee of Strategoi and the Federal Council in Acarnania, but only the top officials, archontes, in Aitolia. This makes the difference between the Acarnanian officials and the 17 Aitolian officials less surprising, as the Acarnanians relied on their college of 7 strategoi and the work of the Synedrion for recruitment and related administrative financial aspects, while the Aitolians entrust the same to their top officials, supported by a committee of military and accounting experts. The presence of these figures aligns perfectly with the commitment defined by the agreement regarding military matters. Naturally, their symmetrical number has drawn attention for its potential connection to a system of 7 districts. However, this hypothesis faces several challenges. First of all, this list of officials remains an isolated case. The idea that the composition of the 2 respective groups followed a principle of representation of the federated members is therefore difficult to prove. The role of the epilectarchoi is not entirely clear, even if we can at least argue that they were commanders of elite troops. The presence of small contingents of soldiers in permanent service, mobilizable in just 6 days, we read in the inscription, along with the cavalry that is selected by definition, is what the parties committed to provide each other in case of need. This, for instance, is reflected in a passage by Diodorus regarding a much earlier event, the Elean War, at the end of the 5th century. Given the general meaning of the name epilectarchos, we cannot truly know whether the divisions of the Aitolian epilectoi and their commanders reflected any hypothetical internal divisions within the Aitolian state. There are no data in the sources that allow us to infer that mobilization criteria or the election of military chiefs could be related to a recognizable general district system of the koinon. In another passage by Polybius, referring to the final moments of the social war, thus to a moment chronologically quite distant from the context of the Aitolian-Acarnanian Treaty, the expression in the first lines suggests that the collective pandemei mobilization, as opposed to the dispatch of young and highly trained selected soldiers, was done city by city, as city by city was the final discharge of the troops. If this is what emerges from our previous observations, we must also ask ourselves whether this council of 7 epilectarchoi was created ad hoc, just to manage the affairs in the neighboring Acarnanians. The group of 7 epilectarchoi was likely mentioned in the dedicatory inscription of a statuary group offered by the Aetolians at Delphi, following a victory over the neighboring Acarnanians. Clearly, the brief honeymoon with Acarnanian was over, and although the context of this dedication is unknown, its most likely dating is shortly after the treaty with the treaty during the division of Acarnania with Epirus under Alexander II. Despite the strong fragmentarity of the reconstructed base, we can observe that unfortunately none of the official mentioned here bear the ethnic adjective, and moreover, only a single Tamias is mentioned, at least according to the reconstruction of the base. Therefore, it is very difficult to read this evidence in connection with the list of officials recorded in the agreement with Acarnania. The only element we can retain and we can stress, which may not be coincidental, is the connection between a board of the Aetolian epilectarchoi and military operations in Acarnania. Returning to the testimony of the Aetolian Acarnanian agreement, we can reconsider the origins of the members of the two respective boards. Many of the ethnics recorded in the two lists are debated, and one, that of the second epilectarchos, is entirely unknown. However, we can attempt to reconsider them, seeking to understand a little bit more. In the first list, the list of the epilectarchoi, there is a predominant presence of officials from Aetolian communities. It's not surprising to find Calydon, the second most influential Aetolian city in terms of leadership roles within the koinon, after the polis of Triconium, nor is it surprising to encounter Callion, Callipolis, which emerged in the 4th century as the urban center of the Aetolian tribe of the Callies. Poteidania, identified with the site of Cambos, was the only significant settlement of the otherwise scarcely urbanized Apodotes tribe, studied by Claudio Antonetti, located in southeastern Aetolia. Phthaion stands among the Aetolian polis that, along with the federal koinon, signed the Azulie agreement for the Artemision of Magnesian on the Meander, and has been identified with the Paleochori site near Kapsoraki, southeast of Lake Triconis. Among the epilectarchoi, we find a reference to Fiscion, a community from West Locris that was part of what Strabo designated as Aetolia Epictetos, added Aetolia. Differently, the Caphreis, most from Western Locris, remain unlocalized to date. They are attributed by Lerin to a group of Locrian communities settled north of Naupactos on the border with Aetolia, whose affiliation with Aetolia or Locris is nonetheless debated. As for the epilectarchos Artaios, we cannot provide any information because this name is entirely unknown as an ethnic adjective. I only note, without knowing what implications my present observation might lead to, that Artaios is attested as a proper name, with the vast majority of attestation concentrated in Crete. The presence of Cretan contingents, essentially mercenaries, concerned many powers of the time, including the Aetolians, who also integrated them into their Sympoliteia. Epigraphic sources from a later period that testify to the story of the Cretan mercenary Epicles, who settled as a resident in Amphissa, enjoying the rights associated with federal citizenship, following an Isopoliteia agreement signed years earlier between the Aetolian and his homeland. For honesty and prudence, I stop here. I leave the suggestion suspended, leaving a question mark next to the name of the second Epilectarchos. What we must remember is that being commanders of selected contingents of soldiers that were not necessarily Aetolian citizens, the criteria for the formation of this board of officials, the Epilectarchoi, may have been primarily based on military purposes, without direct correspondence with the group of Tamiae. Indeed, two different criteria for the composition of the two groups of archontes seem to emerge if we pass to consider the provenance of the Tamiae. Some of them are Aetolians. Triconion and Lysimacheia are certainly cities of the old Aetolia. The ethnic Dian is also attested in the dedication of the sanctuary of Aphrodite Syria at Fistion, north of Lake Triconis, a local context that easily assigns this group to the Aetolian area. But there are also other ethnics that suggest a composition of the board of the treasurers different to that of the Epilectarchoi. Not only do the Western Locrians appear, the Historioi were maybe part of those Locrian communities north of Naupactos on the border with Aetolia, but also communities from Doris and the southwestern slopes of Thessaly that had been absorbed by the Aetolians at the time. Sosthenes was a polis of Oitaia from which in a later period many top officials of the Federation would come. Erinios is a city of Doris. The ethnic Dexieus is uncertain. Lerat has placed it among the Locrian communities north of Naupactos. However, the only clue is the presence of 3 Dexies as private guarantors in a manumission inscriptions at Delphi. 2 of these bear common names, but a third one, Polemitas, bears a rare name tested precisely in the Thessalian Oitaia Malis area. Therefore, I would hypothetically place the Dexies in this area. What can we conclude? From this list, we cannot derive any general division by districts or any meaningful correspondence between the first and the second list. The impression is that the criteria for selecting Epilectarchoi and Tamiae responded to different logics. In the composition of the college of the board of Tamiae, we note a greater contribution from the non-Aetolian communities, which had been early absorbed into the expanding koinon, and certainly had the duty to contribute as tributaries to the common needs of the Federation, especially for the payment of soldiers, a matter that was addressed in the agreement between Aetolia and Acarnania. In this regard, sources mention the case of the polis of Heracleia Trachis, founded by the Spartans and located west of Mount Parnassus, which around 280 had been absorbed by the expanding Aetolian Federation. The words used by Pausanias regarding this matter are very telling. The Aetolians had forced them to become their tributaries, sunteluntes, and yet at the time of the Gauls invasion, they defended this community as if it were their own. Unlike what we see in the list of the Epilectarchontes, a good part of the Tamiae was related to Sunteluntes communities, added communities, and therefore had to deal with the contribution that these federated members were obliged to provide to the Aetolians, especially for military expenses and territorial defense. Let us briefly reconsider the Delphic base mentioned earlier. A monument of this kind can only be linked to something important, namely to the partition of Acarnania between the Aetolians and Alexander II. Polybius contains one, here in the bottom, Polybius contains one of the two references to this partition, which was formalized by a specific agreement, an oath and a treaty, and resulted not only in the division, verismos, of Acarnania territory, but also in the enslavement, andrapodismos, of the Acarnanians. The agreement with the Molossian king, if we look at the model of the previous treaty with Acarnania, must have involved the Aetolian military leaders in the oath, the presence of a board of epilectarchoi for military operations in the Acarnanian area, but maybe also as subscribing officials in the agreement, is perfectly logical in this context, considering that the Aetolian partition surely involved the imposition of garrisons with selected soldiers in permanent service. The presence of the possibly 7 epilectarchoi on the Delphic monument should be understood within the specific context of these years, and therefore cannot be used to confirm a general division of the Aetolian state into 7 districts. On the reverse side of the bronze pillar of the agreement with Acarnania, another text related to Acarnanian matters was added at a later date during the 4th strategy of Chryxenos. The 2 Acarnanian cities of Oinadae and Metropolis were absorbed into the Aetolian League as previously described, in the manners previously described, and they remained under the Aetolian control in the following years. The role of Tyrrhenion, we have judges from Tyrrhenion, is debated. It wasn't originally included in the Aetolian part in the division with Epirus, and at least in 221, the city was outside the Aetolian Federation, as it was attacked by the Aetolians. It is also recorded among the Acarnanian side polis in the Theorodocoi list of Argos in 331. The Tyrrhenian judges may have simply been involved as external experts. However, I agree more with the idea that at this moment, Tyrrhenion may have entered the Aetolian orbit, albeit for a short time, with the Aetolian invasion of the Epirot Acarnania, following the difficulties of the Epirot monarchy and the weakening of its control over its portion of Acarnania. All the subjects involved in the arbitration would therefore be part of the same organizational context, here labeled as Stratikon Telos. I'm not interested in the topographical details of the agreement or the relationship between the 2 Acarnanian cities, now Aetolian. Instead, I would like to reflect on what interest the Aetolians had in ensuring the success of the negotiation, beyond maintaining general good order and tranquility in the territories they had annexed. In this inscription, differently from those we will see recorded in the Locricon Telos connected to Abularchos, there is no mention of any magistracy, any officer specifically linked to the Telos. The indication of the eponymous strategos is followed by the title Crima Gaikon Straticou Teleos. Seems to correspond, let's say, to an archival indication. The text that follows only provides the content that was of interest to display perpetually in the federal sanctuary, namely the arbitral sentence with the definition of the boundaries, while all other possible details of the negotiation between the parties involved are not included. It is often a useful exercise to consider that the epigraphic version of any public document was usually more or less a selection of the original text intended for perpetual display. Consequently, it is always possible to ask which details have not reached us because they perished with the archived copies, having been omitted from the epigraphic copies. Following this perspective, to better understand the meaning of this agreement concerning the two polis of the Straticon Telos, we can be inspired by a later epigraphic document with all due caution. I'm referring to the one involving the two communities of Achaia Phthiotis, Melitaia and Pereia. In the agreement between the polis of Melitaia and its dependent polis of Pereia, the definition of territorial boundaries between the two is followed by a series of other agreements that pre-regulate a possible diechism of Pereia. This possibility includes the definition of other relations between the two communities in terms of property and finances. In particular, the possibility of a diechism is linked to the prohibition on the dominant polis Melitaia from selling the Damosia Cora, while still allowing it to be leased out. The potential diechism of Pereia is also accompanied by a predefinition of its rights and duties as an independent polis within the Federation, the Aitolian Federation. From this agreement, we know that sending one buleutes of Pereia to the federal Synedrium entails the same proportion of responsibility for debt repayment and taxes to the koinon. The definition of the territorial limits of the Cora of Pereia would certainly define the assets the local community could rely on to meet its fiscal obligations to the Federation. The terms of the agreement between the Melitaia and Pereian, managed under the supervision of the federal government and its Caledonian judges, illustrate why it was important for the Federation that member polis did not have territorial and financial disputes that could affect their capacities as tributaries. To avoid misunderstanding, it is important to note that the arbitration between Melitaia and Pereia does not offer clues suggesting the existence of a regional telos. As we have seen, the assignment of political representatives in the Synedrion and the associated fiscal burdens is calibrated based on the polis communities without explicitly or implicitly involving other intermediate structures. All these can reinforce the idea that the Straticon Telos was created to address specific administrative and political needs concerning the management of the turbulent Acarnanian communities annexed to the Aitolian Federation. Other territories incorporated into the greater Aitolia may have had similar structures, which our sources have not documented, but not necessarily all non-Aitolian territories. These hypotheses seem to be confirmed by the analysis of the evidence related to the Locricon Telos. This description from Delphi, the first one from Delphi, contains the only certain mention of a bularchos of the Locricon Telos. The context offered by this document is very different from the one we have just considered. Not only geographically, the inscriptions come from Delphi, but especially chronologically. We are at the end of the Aetolian War with Rome during a period of great crisis for the Federation, which emerged from the weakened and deprived of many territories annexed to formerly annexed to Greater Aitolia. Another difference is the type of document. It is, let's say, a normal manumission inscription that, however, record the bularcos of the Locricon telos in its dating formula before the local archon, together with the local archon of Delphi. Notes also that the same bularcos is mentioned in a second manumission without reference to the Locricon telos, which we should therefore consider as pleonastic in this context. But I put here a question mark. In the case of the arbitration between the Acarnanian cities, the mention of the district in which the dispute was resolved seemed to us more logical and easier to understand. But why here? Although the manumission of a slave cannot be defined as a completely private act, since it involves a public office and affects the financial management of the sanctuary, we can agree that it is not really a matter of regional interest, as was the definition of the boundaries between the two Acarnanian cities within the Straticon telos. So this is a particular dating formula for this particular moment. Instead of thinking in terms of representativeness, proportionality of participation, and balance between the central and local powers in federal states, which I have also been inclined to do naturally, we could attempt an alternative analysis, not stopping at abstract considerations about this office, but looking at the specific historical context in which such an office is mentioned in an epigraphic document, and from a micro-historical perspective at the person who held it. Damoteles, son of Telesarchos, from the Locrian cities of Pistion, is a significant figure in the Aetolian Federation, active between the last third of the 3rd century and the early decades of the following one. Epigraphic documentation preserves many mentions of Damoteles, as well as his sons and grandsons, active in the same area even after the end of Aetolian control over it. Besides being part of the political elite of the time, they seem engaged in business activities. In particular, in a Delphic manumission of the mid-2nd century, the two grandsons and the son of Damoteles free a slave from Bithynia, indicated as a craftsman specialized in metalworking. So they were at least owner of a workshop with specialized slaves. At the same short time frame in which the two Delphic inscriptions mentioning Damoteles as bularcos are produced, we also have Polybius and Livy's accounts of the final moments of the Aetolian War, where we see the two Aetolians, Phaneas and Damoteles, engaged as plenipotentiary ambassadors negotiating with the Roman consul. The tragic situation in which the Aetolians found themselves in this year prompt the strategos to convene the Aetolian Synhedrion and submit the matter to the leading officers of the Aetolians, among whom were certainly Phaneas and Damoteles. Phaneas, from the Aetolian city of Arsinoe, is a well-known politician, Aetolian politician, attested in both epigraphic and literary sources, twice strategos of the Aetolian Federation. Of the Damoteles, as is mentioned by literary sources, here are the passage from Polybius, we know nothing more than the name, but an identification with our Damoteles, attested in epigraphic sources, is highly probable. In Polybius' account, is intensively engaged in negotiation with Rome in the same year 129, in which is also attested as bularcos. It's interesting to note that Phaneas too shows personal connection with Delphi. in the list of properties of the Aetolians confiscated under Acilius Glabrius, Phaneas of Varsinoe appears as the owner of a plot of land in the Hypoplesia region among a majority of owners from the nearby Locrian area. What should we think then of the presence of Damocles as Boularchos in 189-88, and especially is mentioned in Delphi as Boularchos of the Locricon Telos? We know that the Aetolic War led to the loss of Aetolian control over Delphi as immediate consequence of the Battle of Thermopylae. Acilius Glabrio settled Delphi's matters between the end of the 191 and the spring of the following year. And I'm quoting, "For what concerns the sanctuary, if the Thessalians or anyone else sends an embassy to Rome, I will ensure that, based on the powers granted to me, I will safeguard your ancestral rights and preserve the autonomy of the sanctuary and the city." This was followed by the expropriation of the owners, who were all Aetolians, mostly Locrians from Amphissa and Fistion, but also from all the Aetolia, many of them also women. The next year, a letter from Spurius Postumius Albinus to the Delphians and their fictions affirmed the sanctuary's autonomy and territorial integrity. A subsequent letter from the consul Livius Salinator suggests that the Aetolians had reacted hostilely and had made raids into the Delphic territory. It's amidst this turbulent and chaotic context that we should place I think we should place the mention of the Locricon Telos and its administrator Damocles, with the strong possibility that he was the one who had been appointed along and together with Phaneas in the negotiation with Rome. The issue of the Aetolian control over Delphi seems to have been a significant matter for both of them, also on a personal level. If we accept the idea already put forward by Dittenberger that the emergence of the Locrian Telos in the epigraphic documentation is linked to this specific historical juncture, it is precisely to this moment that we must place the other two inscriptions from Naupactos, in which the mention of a Locricon Telos, although integrated, seems to me the only viable solution at the moment. The presence of a Boularchos from the Aetolian Polis Agrinion should not surprise us or create major interpretative problems. At this time, the Telos had evolved as a means to assert Aetolian control over these at-risk territories. The Boularchos of the Locricon Telos was the embodiment of the authority of the Federation, emerging both in Delphi and probably in Naupactos shortly thereafter, when it was still under the control of the Federation. The name of the Boularchos in the inscriptions from Naupactos has been lost, but we can easily speculate about his profile. One of the principes, the chief official of the federal government, perhaps with specific personal ties and interest in the area of Naupactos. These years of desperate military and diplomatic effort have not only disrupted the finances and borders of the Aetolian Federation, but obviously must have had strong repercussions on its institutional structure as well, maybe including the creation of temporary administrative solutions of which we are completely unaware of the details. The emergence of a Locrian Telos and its Boularchos in public epigraphy, let's say public epigraphy, should be read in this light. This doesn't deny the possible existence of such organizational structures in earlier times. This is demonstrated by the agreement between the Aetolia and the Acarnania. But this consideration simply draws attention to the fact that both for the Locrian district and the Stratus district, we are dealing with particular regional contexts and historical moments, as we have seen, and to reduce everything to a single and homogeneous institutional framework would not be correct. This last word can be considered my conclusions. As you have seen, I take 5 minutes. As you have seen, I have not provided definite answers to the question of the tele, but have rather raised additional questions. However, I want to close by still highlighting just a couple of aspects specific to the Aitolian political environment. These aspects underscore the need to consider the organization of the Italian federal states without resorting to Boeotian or Christianic biases, and instead to take into account the political, institutional, and cultural specificities of the context we aim to understand. I have selected these 2 points that are particularly worth stressing for me. The first point concerns the Aitolian capacity for legislative innovation, which suggests us to be cautious in deriving universal views from evidence related to specific chronological and territorial contexts. What I'm saying does not only reflect our assessment of Aitolian politics, but can also be inferred from ancient sources. In this passage from Polybius, the Aetolians are tellingly described as naturally inclined to introduce innovations into their own constitution. The word kainotomia is used metaphorically, but literally means opening up new veins of a mind. An echo of their addiction to legislative innovation and their ability to adapt federal laws to the needs can be found in Aetolian inscriptions. This document revealed the presence of committees on nomographoi, both at the central level and in the federated polis, as well as regular operations of revision and updating of the laws, nomographiae. The second and last relevant point concerns the modalities of the Aetolian decision-making. The presence of institutional devices and rules that ensure the proportional participation of member polis, or the existence of local platform for decentralized political activities, must be evaluated in conjunction with other concurrent aspects, namely the elitist dimension of the political practices. The Aetolian Synedrion, which included representatives from even the smallest polis in proportion to their demographic weight, as we infer from the case of Pereia mentioned above, must have counted more than 1,000 conciliars. However, as the sources show, much of the responsibility for decision-making was on the hands of the leadership of the League, beginning, of course, with the strategoi. The establishment of limited committees tasked with addressing specific issues is well documented. I'm referring to the groups of selected men, the Aetolian Apocletae, known from literary sources, as well as the federal bullarchoi extensively mentioned in the decrees of the Aetolian koinon or the prostatae. Such figures were elected, or more properly, selected and co-optated. In neither case, indeed, we are able to identify criteria of nomination based on the representativeness of the member communities. In this respect, I shall refer to the observations of James O'Neill in his article, The Political Elites of the Acarnanian and Aetolian Leagues. Aetolian was democratic in that it gave equal rights to rich and poor, original citizens, and new recruits. But the working of the political institutions favored the better citizens, both in election to office and in policy making, and the political elite had a limited geographical reach. Indeed, if we look at the provenance of the top officials of the League, they concentrate in a relatively small number of cities, starting from Triconion and Calydon at the heart of the old Aetolia. This indicates that the political making within the Aetolian Federation did not find its sole expression in the representation of the federated members in the koinon government. In the Aetolian state, the full integration of non-Aetolian communities and the dominant control over them ran peculiarly in parallel, like two coexisting sides of the Aetolian style policymaking. And the tele seems to recount a part of this history. Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you, Chiara, for this rich presentation on the Aitolian tele and for giving us new perspectives, because the tele is a matter that always returns in our internal FeBinars and internal workshops and conversations about districts and the system of proportionality in the ancient Koina. Probably there are some questions both online or here in the room. So the floor is open for questions, remarks, integration, I don't know.
You can do that.
Protests.
No, I don't know. There are so many experts by raising hands, so of course. Probably I exploit the privilege to be here and to coordinate the discussion, and to break the ice. No, so your point is, if I got well what you intend. So the tele, in your interpretation, are so to say emergency frameworks during crisis periods or something like that?
Not properly emergency. I cannot say that. I just limited myself to record this fact. To record the fact that the only times in which we find in our sources a reference to the tele is about a crisis, or about territories that must be controlled in a special way. So this is the point. This is a honest registration. So I don't want to infer a rule about this, but for the moment, I think it's possible to to record this fact, because this is a fact. If we reason of a general rule, we cannot be aware of this. But if we put the issue of tele within the geographical and historical context, something more significant seems to emerge. The question of the border of Acarnania, the neighbor Acarnanians that are so resilient, and also the question of Delphi, the relationship with Rome. Was, of course, it must have been a blurred period, not only for our sources, but in the fact that the administration of the territories maybe in that years was very difficult and confused. So maybe the presence of official of the telos is a mean for stressing the presence of the Aitolians in a moment, in a difficult moment. Just the final tentative to stay there. I don't know if you can agree.
There is a question by Jeremy McKinney, probably.
Yes.
Hi, can you hear me and see me?
Yeah.
Please, Jeremy.
Great, thank you. Fantastic presentation, Chiara. Thank you very much. Could I ask you, please, about one slide that you showed that was the territorial arbitration of the Stratikon telos between Aeneadae and Metropolis. And I know that you are primarily concerned with the issue of the telos, its organization and function. But
can you repeat
could
the
I ask
last
you?
words? Can you repeat the last words, because
Sure.
there has been an interruption.
Sure. Sorry. I wanted to ask you about the slide that deals with the territorial arbitration.
Yes.
And I wanted to see if you could just comment a little bit further about the content of that arbitration, the mechanism by which it is being worked out, and share with us your reflections on what the character of the Straticon telos was like, given that there seems to be a very hard border between some of the constituent members. If I'm understanding your diatekisma correctly, could you just say a little bit more about that entire episode, please?
Okay. I can come back to the slide.
Yeah, please.
Yes.
Okay, great. Grazie.
Riesco ad andare indietro?
Dovrebbe. Eccolo.
Ah, ok.
Okay.
That's it.
Yes. This one. So
yep.
the point I stressed here is that yes, there is a diatekism, but I prefer not to go deeper in these topographic questions. The problem is also that we really don't know what this diatekism is. Maybe is a natural part of the river. So it's difficult. We have no archaeological finding on a diatekism between the two polis. So yes, I prefer not to dwell into this problem. What I thought about this agreement was that this part, the declaration of the border between Oenadai and Metropolis was a matter of interest for the two communities, but also was a matter of interest for the whole stability of this difficult area. That's all. I don't know if I'm satisfied your question.
I think it's something that would really be worth all of us exploring a little further. That sounds to me like a kind of hard border between the two locations, and it to me would hint at an earlier history of violent conflict. But maybe I'm reading too much into diatekism.
Maybe. I didn't hear the last words.
Oh, my response, my reaction was that the presence of a diatekism seemed to suggest to me a hard boundary and a real conflict.
Yes.
But okay.
Yes, of course. But the two things cannot. We can keep all together. The presence of a real conflict between the two polis could be his effects also on the assessment, also of the later financial assessment of the two. So maybe the two things are equally valid. Maybe the greater problem was this conflict, and other related problem in our point of view, the point of view of the organization of the state, are also related to the issue I spoke about.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
There are two more questions, the one from Brian Bike and the other from Claudia Antonetti. Probably we'll start with Roy, who was first.
Hi, thank you, and sorry I couldn't be there today because of just some I've solid reasons for that, but I really enjoy your paper. I was just trying to chime in here with what Jeremy just said. I'm curious whether this very straight border or this very hard border has something to do with a very volatile environment, and I mean this from a natural perspective. That I know Aitolia was like an island, and I know there were some fluctuations, literally, in this sense, with the river delta and changes in the landscape. And I'm not sure if there would be around this time. I would have to check the actual paleo environmental data. But I think, and I know, for instance, if I remember correctly, that in the Archaic period it was already a lot of changes in the marshland. So I don't know if maybe something similar occurred in this period, and that's why they need this very clear border that is not as susceptible to issues with the environment rather than an actual conflict. But maybe I'm just trying to be, maybe I'm very
we can also,
and I'm naive. But...
maybe we can put together also this problem. Maybe a conflict could be generated by natural problem, borders that are not clear, and so generate conflicts. But of course, all this data must be integrated, and this is my purpose, integrated with other strong archaeological data. I need other strong archaeological data, and I need other strong, for instance, prosopographical data. So I want to go further in the hypothesis I presented to you today. So I need many more things for have a reliable panorama, and also your suggestion is very precious. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Roy. The next one is Claudia Antonetti. Please, Claudia, you can pose your question.
Okay. Hi. Can you see me? Ciao. Thank you, Chiara, for this very interesting presentation. And I also think that these Aitolian tele were not a general structure or district, not at all. And of course, these two areas were crucial in different moments for all the koinon. As for the Straticon telos, I tried to demonstrate in the previous FeBo seminar that, yeah, this was really a crucial area, this lower course of the Achelos, and not only for the two koina, but also for a very huge mountainous area far from this. So it's really a crucial area. But I want to ask you if you can comment a little bit further the statues in Delphi, because maybe I didn't good understand. What do you think about so the statue to Apollo and Artemis after the war against Acarnania? Thank you, Chiara.
Okay, maybe I can speak without coming again on the slide. The question is that the reconstruction of the base implies the presence of 7 epilectarchoi. And these have been used to confirm, in particular in the article by Kosten, to confirm the presence of 7 pieces, 7 districts, something that was divided in seven parts. But if we start from the consideration that also these 7 epilectarchoi were related to Aitolia, we can consider the agreement between Aitolia and Carnania and this monument just in this context, independently by the fact that the 7 epilectarchoi were appointed to for helping the Acarnanians in the first stage in the agreement, and we see the 7 epilectarchoi after in a victory monument against the Acarnanians. They were appointed, I think, in my opinion, and now maybe I will change my ideas, but it seems to me that they can be related in any case to Acarnania, independently by the fact they were acting in Acarnania for help or for war, or for raids, or for garrisons, and so on. This is what it seems to me that we can infer from this group. Of course, the important point is that the presence of the epilectarchoi doesn't give any confirmation, any support to the presence of a general division of the state in 7 districts, and this is the important point, I think.
Yes, I agree on this last point, of course. But as for the previous comments, we don't know on what we know. It's so few about this basis that so the inference from this monument are must be very cautious and very
Okay, we can speak together, Claudia, on this.
Yeah, it's
at least I need
it's very difficult.
A little bit more on this. So
okay, thank you.
I will be pleased to speak with you,
Thank you
on this problem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara. Really, thank you also on my part for this very rich and well-structured and consistent presentation with so many data and a few very clear points. I have a lot of questions, but we have dinner later on. Yes. And so here I will limit myself on asking 3 questions. The first one is concerns the epilectarchoi. Why frontfiskales? These epilectarchoi are employed, if I correctly understood, in a more northern area.
Yes.
So why frontfiskales? And then I missed the chronology of this inscription, which is very important also in relation to the
yes, the chronology is not simple. Late 60, early 50.
Okay,
it's debated. Of the 3rd century. Okay, it's debated.
Of course. Then
my answer is I don't know why frontfiskales, but I think that the epilectarchoi were less dependent on sort of are more dependent on military purposes. When I maybe I was military skills.
And maybe they do not represent a specific area.
No. Okay. This is my impression. This is my impression, because the only thing you can do with these 2 lists is to try to locate all these communities. And of course, it's very difficult because many of these communities are difficult to locate. So you can reasoning about, for instance, prosopography or other things.
But this case is clear.
Yes, yes. Locals, because it was part, and they were integrated. So the point is, it's also my final words was about the two faces of the Aitolians. So they, for the one part, integrated, maybe also integrated the elites, military elites, or something else of the non-Aitolian territories. For the other hand, we see the control, maybe the tele are related to control. So it's very difficult to assess.
Maybe they integrated people more than they annexed territories.
With the Simpoliteia, my answer is yes. In any case, we don't know. When we speak about epilectorco, is a very general word. We don't know if when we selected soldiers, we can have professional soldiers, we can have citizens or not. And we must go deeper, but in any case, it's also important to make questions, just not to accept our bias. Okay, yes, but they integrated a lot. They integrated a lot because with the Simpoliteia, they integrated.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it is more a matter of integrating people than controlling territories and annexing territories. More generally, not only with regard to Simpoliteia, as for example the one between Military and Pereira, but also Tele maybe. I'm thinking of the Locrians and the fact that if I correctly remember, the Aitolian annexed the Locrian city step by step, not the whole locals together. So
yes.
I'm asking myself,
there is a sort of
than on territories.
There is a sort of in some contexts, not for instance in the part of Acarnania that was with the merismos with Epirus, but other parts, for instance, Phocis or Locris, are in a blurred zone between diplomacy, war, and Simpoliteia. So they are allies. They become Sunteluntes. Then they become Aitoloi. Maybe this is blurred also for our sources, but not only. The question is that maybe Aitoloi, the Aitolians have, let's say, interpersonal relationships with the other elites, with the other peoples, have a relationship, they have friendship, or they conquer them as Sunteluntes. And this became after a territorial incorporation. But I very agree with you. Of course, we reason about territories, but maybe the elitarian and personalistic Aitolian style of policy making entails also that you have noticed.
Thank you. And sorry, one last question. Would you go so far to address the creation of this tele as a way to manage newly acquired cities, areas, which become in that very moment frontier areas? if our perspective is the one of the Aitolian expanding, so the newly acquired area become frontier area, which are maybe not so easy to control, and the telos can become a way to.
Yes, maybe because they were frontiers area, and also because they had identities that in some way, yes, but in some way must be respected by the Aitolians. And for instance, when the territory of the Koinon was lost many parts after this becoming smaller and smaller, other Koina emerged again from previous identities, the Koinon of the Dorians, the Koinon of the Italians, the Koinon, the other the Locrans, and so on. So maybe there was also an interchange between control and respect of the identities. After the Aitolia kept these territories, these communities were already integrated each other. So, yes, this one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One of the questions in the room.
So
There is a question in the room.
Just a last question.
Yes, you have to come here. No, we have the mic. We have the mic. Grazie, Nan.
Hi, thank you very much. Just a very broad question out of curiosity, following what you were saying at the end of the paper about political institution and civic elite, which we can see very clearly, and it's basically in terms of Hellenistic history, the relationship between the democracy and the urgentism. Also because the guy you mentioned, Demosthenes, I mean, you also said that he was a civic benefactor, a wealthy benefactor.
No, it was not a benefactor, but maybe was if his family was wealth. They were involved in business activities because they freed slaves that were with expertise. So they were at least owner of the workshops. That so they are not so wealthy for these things, but it's significant to find also this.
And also because you said that there is the hint, perhaps, that some magistrates were not elected but appointed, selected, and so we may wonder on which criteria. Although, I mean, in the documents you show, there is clearly a democratic flavored language, you know, with this ulai, with these things.
Yes.
And so I wonder just what you think about the civic elites and the role it plays in all of this, even in terms of the koinon and of the federal mechanisms.
Yes, I can answer in very general ways. From the one hand, the elites are a Hellenistic phenomenon, so maybe it's not significant to stress this dimension. But on the other hand, if we deal with ethne, with Aitolians, with Epirotes, and so on, we see also that there is, if we reconstruct the prosopography or we reflect on particular phenomena, we can find that the personalistic way of making policy was also an ancient, let's say, tribal way to manage. Even if we have on the other hand bodies that are advanced, that had representations So, for instance, if we look at the strategoi, they come from a few polis, but the agreement between Melitaia and Pereia demonstrates very clearly that each polis, even the tiny polis like Pereia, had its own stage in the Synedrion. So there was an attention for law, the nomographoi, and the revisions of the revisions of law are an attention for the rules, not properly democratic rules, but at least polis rules and federal rules. But on the other hand, we must also consider that decision and other things were taken this way. And this is not only an Hellenistic style, but for this part, for some part of the Greece was also a style of the local population.
Thank you very much.
So thank you for, probably it's very late. Thank you all for your presence, both online and here in the room. So again, we remind you next appointment with Liv Donnellan of the University of Melbourne in 5 days, and we will see on Monday then. So I close again with a close idea.
Yeah. Thank you again.
Thank
Also on
you.
my part, both
Thank you to all.
to Chiara Lasagni and to those attending online, also for contributing to this wonderful debate. Thank you and see you on Monday. I hope all welcome, of course. Bye.